Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I've been looking forward to this with a gentleman that was on the show years ago. I'm going to say 10 years ago or more. And he's got a really interesting theory on UFO propulsion, the possibility of it. And even Mark D'Antonio, our good friend of the show, he's probably listening. He actually has worked kind of with the same idea and knows Robert. He likes to be called Bob, so I'm going to be calling him Bob right beside me. I'll introduce him in just a second. This week, our blog from Charles Lear is expecting Bigfoot and they see a UFO. There's some type of strange, by the way, Charles has been writing some amazing blogs lately. Check them out over at podcastufo.com. We have a blog section. And there's, I want to say, many dozens, maybe even over 100 blogs there to choose from, and all very historic tidbits on UFO incidents, a lot of historic ones that were really unique and unheard of. So check this one out. Same as always, very well written, very well researched. Charles has 2 books, and he's going strong. He was on this show not that long ago. But anyway, I am very excited to honor the guest tonight. We're both on. Here we are, Robert or Bob. I'm going to call you.
Yeah.
Here we are on the Cape. Bob has a place on the Cape down here, and we met up where I am, and here we are. So welcome.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for having me on your show. And I, as you mentioned, I've been on it before, and that was a blast. The last time I was on it, that was up in Woburn.
When I was in, I had an office.
Massachusetts.
That's right. I had an office in Woburn. Yeah. And yes, you came there, and yeah, it was, more or less the same, what we're going to talk about, but that was so long ago, and you've had so much time in between now and then to probably refine a lot of the things and, some other ideas along with them.
Over time.
Yeah. But if you would, for the person who didn't catch you, 10 years ago, if you would, I know your family is, there's engineers in your family, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So, I guess I want to ask you, first of all, why the interest in UFOs? And secondly, why how did you get on this road to trying to figure out how they could possibly travel in the great distances?
That's a great intro and question there. And I can tell you that I have been interested in the UFO phenomenon since the 1960s. So you can tell I'm a little bit older. So I'll admit to it. and way back in the 60s, there was something called Project Blue Book that was run by the Air Force. And Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the head of that, or the scientific advisor to that Project Blue Book. And I was fascinated with the UFO phenomenon way back then. And having back in 1957, although I was just a kid, I actually had a UFO sighting. And for many of the people in the audience there who have followed the UFO phenomenon over the years, they'll recognize that 1957 was a banner year in the UFO history, because at that time we had a flurry of UFO reports all over the earth. It was a UFO wave of proportions that we have not seen perhaps since.
I thought that was 52.
There was one in 52, but 57 was the big one.
Is that right?
And yeah, and that was,
I don't hear about it as much.
Yeah, that was right after Sputnik was launched.
Oh yeah,
and it was right during.
Everyone was looking up in the sky.
Everybody was looking in the sky, and there were, like in Level in Texas, there were close encounters with UFOs where they came down close to the ground and stopped trucks and cars, and many people were eyewitnesses to these UFOs, several hundred feet in diameter, glowing extremely brightly. And in every single case, the engines of the vehicles shut down, and Dr. Hynek said that was a characteristic of close encounter UFO reports. But there were many more reports during that period, and Dr. Hynek eventually wrote a book on the topic. At first, Dr. Hynek was a skeptic, but then later on, he became very, maybe not so much a believer, but somebody who felt that there was something to this, whether it was extraterrestrial or it could have a terrestrial origin. But he felt that it was definitely necessary to investigate this phenomenon. And I've been interested in this ever since. And can I do a little biography?
Oh, yeah.
So I have a degree in math from Rutgers University and a degree in aerospace engineering. And so I ended up working for a computer company, Hewlett-Packard, for 27 years. I had a few other jobs as well, but that was the main part of my career. And I retired from there, I guess, around 2010. But in my last few years at Hewlett-Packard, I was also working on writing a book, because in the 80s and 90s, they had been working on something called string theory. And this string theory looked to me like a potential candidate for explaining the UFO phenomenon. It involved extra dimensions and things like that. And by the mid 90s and into the early 2000s, there was tremendous excitement about these various theories, and which we'll get to see tonight. And I realized back at that time that this very likely explained the technology of UFOs, although we still do not fully understand string theory. The direction it's going does suggest very strongly that this is likely to explain the technology of these craft, which I do believe are extraterrestrial in origin. And so I guess without further ado, perhaps we could start the slideshow.
Okay, sure.
Oh, one more thing, sorry. I wrote a book on the topic, Solving the UFO Enigma, published in 2011, and it was a multi-year project. And it was a result of decades of studying physics and science, and the subtitle is How Modern Physics is Revealing the Technology of UFOs.
Wow. Okay. All right. So this is kind of an experiment. I'm going to do this PowerPoint, and hopefully there will be no issues at all. But I used to have people actually love to watch my shows because they thought it was funny, all the issues that I did have.
Oh.
I was entertaining to them. So I don't want to be entertaining. I just want to actually do a good show. So hopefully this will be working okay. So hopefully everyone sees this as a PowerPoint. And let's see.
Yep. And Martin, that's the cover of my book. And the picture that you see in the middle, that was taken in Belgium in the 1990s. And I put it there deliberately. It's a triangle UFO. And one of the things that I will mention many times during the show is that one of the characteristics of UFOs is that they have a circular or spherical aspect to them. Even the triangular UFOs, you'll notice in this picture that the corners of the UFO are brightly lit circles and a brightly lit circle in the middle. And this is one of the unusual but consistent characteristics of UFOs. And by the end of the slideshow, we will see why I believe that circular characteristic is so prominent in UFO technology.
Okay. Yeah. One thing I want to point out, though, Robert, is this particular picture. There was a guy that came forward that said he faked it.
No,
I'm going to talk about. There are two. The other one.
Yep.
Okay, but anyway, the guy that came forward, he could never reproduce what he did. So it's really iffy if that other one was even a fake.
I do want to bring that to people's attention. There were two photographs taken, two that got into the media, and this one was not the one that was faked.
Okay, and that one wasn't even. That one supposedly he could not reproduce
after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah, that's but this is definitely not that one.
I'm
Leslie,
sorry. I'm sorry that I wasted all the time on that.
and
But you'll see another similar one to this. Anyway, I'm going to move on this one right
Okay.
here.
so if everybody can see that, the next slide here, there's a new theory of Earth's rapid creation that makes the idea of alien life way more likely. And it used to be thought that it took hundreds of millions of years for the early Earth to form out of the debris circling around our protostar, the sun. And so that was the original theory that has been around for maybe 50 years. But now, new evidence by looking at other star systems with the Hubble telescope and other space telescopes, they now realize that it looks like the early Earth may have been formed much more quickly than that. Instead of several hundred million years, it looks like it formed within about 5 million years. And the reason that's important is this, because if it did take several hundred million years in the original theory, it was thought that there were large planetoids that were smashing into each other. If that were the case, the Earth having a lot of water on its surface would have been very unlikely, and it would have taken some unusual circumstances to create the water planet that we see today. But the new theory suggests that if the Earth formed fairly quickly within 5 million years, then it would have retained all the water that had been swept up as it orbited around the sun. And that theory looks way more likely today. But I thought I'd include that partly because I thought the picture looked really neat.
Okay.
So we could do the next slide.
Yep.
So the big thing about UFOs is we have to look at the evidence that has been collected over, I'd say, pretty close to the last 100 years. And that evidence, I think, is going to be key to figuring out how the technology of these UFOs. And so some of the most important characteristics are incredible accelerations of these UFOs. Many military pilots and many people on the ground who have observed UFOs have noticed this extremely rapid acceleration. And when I say rapid, I mean blinding acceleration. And that actually seems to defy the laws of inertia. You can think of inertia as the resistance to acceleration by a mass. And somehow these things, which they do believe are extremely massive and very heavy, are able to defy the laws of inertia. And so a second characteristic, which is, I believe, also very important, is the intense glow of these craft and their ability to levitate. A third characteristic that is going to be key, I believe, to understanding the UFO phenomenon is partial or complete transparency. Many times, pilots and ground observers have seen these UFOs become partially transparent and then totally disappear.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And in one particular case that we'll see in a moment here, a pilot observed a UFO appearing as if it was splitting the sky, the blue sky open, and it seemed to emerge out of nothing.
Wow.
And so this is going to be, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I've heard so many, and I hope you don't mind if I
not at all. No.
Interject these things. So many people have said that they have seen something like almost blink out and then blink in, and even at another location.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so we're going to see in a little bit here why that, I think, is pointing toward UFO technology. And another strange characteristic of these UFOs is a very strong, attractive gravity field, short range to be sure, but it appears to be attractive rather than repulsive. So if these things were using anti-gravity, which, by the way, I do not believe is even possible, I've studied the field equations of general relativity, and gravity is really caused by the warping of space and time, and this would require a reverse warping of space and time, which even Einstein felt was not really possible. And so that so anti-gravity does not seem to be the explanation with UFO technology. But what's puzzling is, why should it have a short-range, attractive gravity field? So we'll get into that in a bit.
All right, before we move on from that, not just one person, but I'm going to just talk about one person in particular that was a friend of the show many years ago, and she was in Australia. And when she was a little girl, about 8 or 9 years old, she was with her grandmother, and they were in the garden, like weeding or something in the garden. And all of a sudden, she felt something and looked above, and there was a big, this was in the, I believe in the early 70s, a big triangle UFO was over them, and she felt like she was being forced down on the ground.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know what
it could be. Well, we'll see why at a short distance, I believe they have an attractive gravity field. That might have been a somewhat longer distance, and
I'm not sure how far overhead it was. I don't know if she would even remember.
Not quite yet. So then the other thing that's very important, I believe, is the consistent shapes, which I mentioned at the beginning, that these things often have a spherical or circular aspect to them, and whether they're discs, cylinders, delta shapes, that always appears to be present. And another thing that's very important, Ted Phillips, who worked for Dr. J. Allen Hynek at the Center for UFO Studies up in Illinois, he did studies of all the credible landing sites where they had indentations into the ground, and they estimated that the typical what you might call scout craft that appear at lower elevations appear to be in the range of 10 to 30 tons. That's pretty heavy.
Wow.
That's a lot of mass. And we can. Now, I'm going to give some interesting examples. Captain Phil Schultz, back in 1981, and he and his first officer observed a round UFO with 6 black portholes on a perfectly clear summer day. And this thing approached their L-1011. That's a Lockheed. Many people are probably too young to remember that, but it was quite an aircraft. And it came directly in front of their aircraft, and then it did a maneuver at 1,000 miles per hour right in front of their aircraft. And then the UFO departed with an estimated 20 G turn. The best that human pilots can do is about 10 Gs. So that's pretty phenomenal. And on the next slide, so here you see a graphical picture of the UFO, and you can see the extremely sharp turn in this cockpit view of the UFO. And by the way, it was Captain Schultz, who was the one who reported the UFO when it first appeared to be splitting the sky open. And so that's significant, as we will see in a little bit further.
So we have a cockpit windshield this graphic is on. And I want to mention this too for everyone that is listening to just the audio. If you click on the show notes, I'm not able to actually put this PowerPoint in any type of presentation anywhere on my website. But what you can do in the show notes is the YouTube video. If you care to see some of these images and graphics, I'm afraid you're going to have to listen twice and go through the YouTube or on Facebook. There's a few other places where this is. But anyway, for those of you who are watching live, thank you. I'm not going to be able to even see any questions if you have any while we're doing the PowerPoint. After that, I can look to see what you may have for questions in chat. But yeah, continue on, Captain Schultz.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Captain Schultz, his reaction to the encounter was recorded by Dr. Richard Haynes, who did his own separate UFO investigation some years ago. And but Dr. Haynes, so Captain Schultz said that he had extensive experience as a U.S. Navy fighter pilot, and he had totally rejected the reality of UFOs. But after the sighting, he told Dr. Haynes that there is no doubt in my mind it was an extraterrestrial craft. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is. That's quite a statement.
And many of you have heard of Commander, I forget,
Fravor, David Fravor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
It's being hidden.
My screen is blotted out a bit. U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor, who lives up in New Hampshire, by the way.
That's right.
He was flying his F-14 back in the early 2000s, and he observed a tic-tac shaped UFO, and this UFO behaved very erratically, and so his encounter was what's very interesting about his encounter. They recorded it on infrared as well as radar, and some pilots observed similar UFOs in the area. Oh, this, by the way, was about 60-80 miles off the coast of San Diego, California.
Right.
The Navy does a lot of training out there. We have a major naval base in San Diego, and we can. So, how about how would you compare UFO performance to Earth technology? Well, fighter jets can do about 13 G's acceleration. Beyond that, no human can survive the G forces that are created at that acceleration. The Boeing Hybex anti-missile missile that can accelerate between 300 and 400 G's.
Wow.
But that's about it. Beyond that,
things fall apart.
They disintegrate. The USS Nimitz Tic Tac, observed by Commander David Fravor, that measured 5,000 G's.
Is that when it dropped from the level of 60,000 feet, whatever it was, and down to the ocean?
And exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, in less than a second.
And it less than a second. Exactly right. Another interesting UFO observation report comes from Air France Captain Charles Duboc, and he saw on January 28th, 1994, near Paris, he saw a 1,000-foot diameter red UFO, glowing red UFO. He had it on radar. It was also picked up on ground radar, and he and his crew observed the UFO become partially transparent as it began at the same time to fade on his radar, and then it disappeared entirely.
And off radar too.
And off radar too.
So visually and
off radar.
Wow, that's crazy. Huh?
Isn't that something? Yeah. In Calgary, Canada, a Canadian pilot saw this on December 17th, 2014. A cylindrical shaped UFO. Again, by the way, notice the circular aspect to these UFOs. And he too observed he was above the UFO, but he said at first it appeared as a perfectly solid object, but then it began to fade and he could actually see the road below through the UFO, and then it finally disappeared entirely.
Amazing.
Now, here's a very interesting report out of New Zealand back in, I think, 1959. And this was Elaine Moreland, who was she observed close up a circular UFO that came down within about 25 feet of the ground. And she observed two entities inside the UFO. They were both facing forward, tandem seated, and through a clear glass dome, and or what appeared to be glass. And what was fascinating about this one, and so what the story goes that it was very early in the morning. It was still dark. This is 1959. I think it was June. I can't quite read that date. And but anyway, June or July.
July 13th.
July. Thank you. And so she, as she was going across a field down there in the English speaking world, as in the British Commonwealth, they call it a paddy, PADDY, paddock, and she noticed that the field or the paddock was becoming kind of a odd green color. So she looked up and she was shocked to see these two bright green lights getting bigger and bigger and bigger very rapidly. And so she dropped her milking buckets. She was going out to milk the cows.
Huh?
And and for people who farm, they know about this stuff. I'm from New Jersey. And and she ran into a clump of woods, and she peeked out from behind the trees, and she observed this object come down. And she said that it hovered about 25 feet above the ground, but she noticed two rows of jets appearing on the side of this thing. And the one row was shooting out flames in one direction parallel to the surface of the UFO. The bottom row is shooting out flames in the opposite direction. And both of them were both, at all times. And then finally the thing, she did observe the rear person stand up and appear to look at something perhaps on the ground. And then he sat down, and then the object began to make a whining noise, and it started to lift. And then she said, again, characteristic of UFOs, it rose straight up into the sky at extreme acceleration. If we can move on.
Yep.
Here's some other examples of UFOs becoming transparent. In Caracas, Venezuela, in 1974, hundreds of people observed 4 stationary UFOs that were clearly visible, and they were matte black in color. And then suddenly they disappeared just like that. They just blinked out. In Phoenix, Arizona, March 1997, this is during the Phoenix Lights, which many people who have followed the UFO phenomenon are well aware of. They saw parts of the UFO appear semi-transparent, and I thought that was a very great interest.
Yeah, some of the observers on that said that it looked like they could see like a waviness, like a ripple effect.
Exactly right. Yeah. They could see this rippling effect. And they could see stars. It was seen
behind
at night. They could see stars behind it, somewhat distorted.
Yes. Yeah. Like there was something there, but you could kind of see through it.
Yes.
Right.
But not all parts of the UFO, the Phoenix UFO. Some parts look perfectly solid. So another good example of transparency is the Rendlesham Forest, RAF Bentwaters Base, Colonel Charles Hall. And this is back in 1980. And this is a high-ranking officer who, by the way, was totally skeptical of UFOs until he had a truly close encounter. But as part of his encounter, he did see a UFO shoot down a beam of light right at his feet in the dark. And he said they were shocked. And then that or a different UFO was seen coming down into a field nearby, and they could clearly see it. It was solid. It was brightly lit. And then as they watched, it started to implode, look like it was becoming smaller, and then it just literally disappeared. And then another one, very interesting, is in the Tasman Sea off of Australia.
I hope you don't mind me interrupting.
Not at all. No.
Before we move on from Rendlesham, when I spoke to Charles Halt a couple of times, he's been on my show.
Great.
But he said that the light wasn't like an ordinary light that shot down at his feet. It was almost like a tube. He said it was a very strange thing. It didn't act like a normal light would. You know,
Uh-huh.
instead
Yeah.
of like coming down and lighting everything up, it came down like a tube instead.
I see what you're saying. Instead of coming down instantaneously, it seemed to grow going downward. Yeah.
Like a
And
tube.
like a tube. Yep.
Yeah.
That's been reported before, where a beam of light will come down and then it will retract like a ladder, rather than just click out. It retracts
Yeah.
like a ladder.
Like that's how it came down,
Yeah.
according to him. Yeah.
And if I'm correct in my theory that I read about in the book, that they have figured out how to control gravitational forces, extreme gravitational forces, then light is subject to gravity. We know that Einstein predicted that light would bend around stars,
Right.
and that was actually observed, I think, in, I forget, 1919 or something like that. And so another fascinating example of disappearance was the Tasman Sea, Australia, 1931 sighting by aviation pioneer Sir Francis Chichester. I'm sure very few people have heard of him, but he was famous back in the day, you know.
Mhm.
And he saw a UFO. He had a biplane, so this thing was not going particularly fast,
Right.
maybe 100 miles an hour.
At most, yeah.
At most. And it was just putting through the sky. And he said he could clearly say this disc-shaped UFO. Now, by the way, back then, he didn't know what it was. He didn't call it a UFO. That's a more modern term. He just called it a craft. And he said this strange craft was perfectly solid looking at one point, and it had a hump on the top. And so he said, then it started to fade right in front of him, and then he could gradually see through it, and then he could see the waves in the ocean below right through this craft.
Wow.
And then he said it totally disappeared. So that's another example. And you'll notice the similarity of that sighting to some of the other ones we talked about before. And so this stuff is extremely important to understanding the UFOs. And one last one, in broad daylight in 1953, an F-86 pilot saw a hovering UFO, which blinked out just like that right in front of them, you know. Okay. And so the two big questions on UFO technology, and now we're going to start to get into it. We'll have to get a little bit technical, and for the audio audience, I'll try to describe these in a way that you can visualize it. So the two big questions on UFO technology are, how do they get here, number one? And the second thing, how are these craft able to perform inertia-defying acrobatics in Earth's atmosphere? So we'll take a look at the first question, how did they get here?
Next. Also, on the second part, I have something to add when you get there.
Okay. Yeah. So how did they get here? Now, people have thought about this, the idea of interstellar travel for many, many years, decades and decades, going back to Flash Gordon. And so some people have thought about, so the basic ideas that have come out of this are, number one, can they go faster than the speed of light? There are particles that are postulated called tachyons that are believed to go faster than the speed of light. But Einstein himself said, no, that's not possible. And his theory of special relativity forbids faster than light travel for a material object. And so people can argue about immaterial, but we won't get into that. The second possibility is near light speed. And that does happen to be possible. But it takes enormous energy to get up to the speed of light and maintain that speed. You have staggering energy requirements. And even if you could, getting to the nearest star system to planet Earth, Alpha Centauri is 4.5 light years. It would take thousands of years, not thousands, it would take many years to get there. And unfortunately, if you had a twin back at Earth, and when you came back, your twin would be long gone. So it's not a practical solution. Then the third idea was the idea of warping of space-time. If you could figure out how to warp space-time, then you could kind of travel through space like people surf on a wave. And a Mexican physicist by the name of Miguel Alcubierre came up with an idea many years ago about building a spaceship where you could compress space in front of you and expand space behind you. And he calculated, correctly that you could go many times the equivalent of the speed of light, but you really wouldn't be going faster. You'd be just warping space in front of you and expanding it behind you. But again, the gating factor on this is the energy. The amount of energy required is absolutely gigantic. And so none of these solutions appear really feasible. And so, so let's take a look at the direction of modern physics, and let's see if there's something out there that new concepts, new theories that might help us explain how UFOs are getting to planet Earth and able to move around in our atmosphere. So the two pillars of modern physics are general relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, one of the four fundamental forces of nature, and it talks about how gravity affects matter, how it interacts with matter. And the second major pillar of modern physics is quantum mechanics, which deals with the other three fundamental forces in nature. So those would be the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism, and how they interact with matter. So in 2015, it was the 100th anniversary of general relativity, and I believe that gravity will be the key to understanding the UFO phenomenon. And for the audio people, you can't see this, but I have
Thank God.
But I have a slide which shows the field equations, the truncated version of the field equations of general relativity, and the left-hand side of the field equations, what they describe is the warping or curvature of space-time, which is the cause of gravity, which creates what we call gravity. And on the right-hand side is the matter and energy that causes space-time to warp. And that's what these field equations do. Unfortunately, they are very complicated to solve. And on this next slide, which I'm afraid the audio cannot see, I show that each of the terms in, so there's four major clumps of terms in the field equations, three on the left side and one on the right side. And what I do is I take the first term and I expand it, and then so that you can see in another equation here what that turns into, and it turns into what looks like a lot of gobbledygook, and it's hideously complicated. And then it has a lot of differential equations and stuff, and partial derivatives. And for those of you who like math, and then I took a term inside of that equation on the right-hand side, and I expanded that, and I show what's inside of that, and it's called the Christoffel connection coefficient for anybody who. But what this is all about is this: the field equations are extremely hard to solve, and in fact, the first exact solution to the field equations did not come from Einstein himself. He came up with approximations, not to say, but these approximations were very, very accurate, and but nevertheless, he never had it, and he did not come up with the first exact solution. But just to give you an idea of why that's the case, just to figure out the gravity, what's going on with gravity between your thumb and forefinger, if each member of the audience holds them together, can take up to 120 equations.
Oh my God.
So people can appreciate how horrifying these things are. So we can,
yeah.
And one more. And so, so the physics community, their reaction, they couldn't wait to see the field equations, but when they did, their reaction was, You got to be kidding.
Yeah, I can
And,
see that. That's
and,
funny.
Now,
Oh,
stop
sorry.
there. Stop there. Oh, no, the next one.
Yeah.
And, so the first exact solution to the Einstein field equations were by Lieutenant Carl Schwarzschild in 1916. And he was a lieutenant, an officer in the artillery of the German army on the Eastern Front. This was in World War I. And now people today marvel at how Lieutenant Schwarzschild could have worked on the field equations. Remember, they had just come out in 1915, in the fall of 1915. So it's kind of amazing today, but somehow he found the time. And everybody will know immediately what his exact solution to the field equations are, as we see on the next slide here, but I'll explain audio too. The Schwarzschild black hole. And you may wonder why I'm bringing up this first exact solution to the field equations. The reason is it's extremely important to the UFO phenomenon. And so what the Schwarzschild black hole formula talks about is that any object with a radius less than the Schwarzschild radius, which is determined by the equation he figured out, becomes a black hole. And this is the second part of this I want to explain. Very, very important. And everybody should keep this in the back of their mind. Photons, which go at the speed of light, and any other particle going at the speed of light or close to the speed of light cannot escape a black hole. Keep that in the back of your mind, because it's going to be very important to the solution to the UFO phenomenon. Now, one more very important thing, the last thing we're going to say about general relativity. Yes. So it turns out that black holes produce a very strong magnetic field. And that's another thing you want to keep in mind as we continue.
Sorry.
Next, we're going to cover the other pillar of modern physics. We just finished general relativity, gravity. Yeah. Oh, no, keep it right there. This is quantum mechanics. And at this tiny scale, for hundreds of years, dating back to Newton and even before, it was assumed that energy was continuous like a wave. But in the 20th century, at the very beginning of the 20th century, it was discovered that energy was not continuous. Instead, it came in discrete bits or pieces, which is where the term quanta comes from, bit or piece. And that's where quantum mechanics comes from, the word, or the phrase. And so that was really strange, because so the reason they discovered this is they began looking at the spectra of light and of elements, and they noticed that they were discrete lines. If you look at a prism, you shine light through it, it comes out into discrete little lines. It was believed that theoretically, if energy was continuous, it should be just one blur of different colors, but each moving gradually into the next. But that's not the case. So for elements when they were observed. And it was discovered by Max Planck, a German physicist, in the year 1900. The formula he developed was energy is equal to h, Planck's constant, time frequency. And that constant, which was derived from experiment, came as a total shock to the world of physics. But it began to explain a lot of things, and it was basically the birth of quantum mechanics. One of the first breakthroughs after the early days of quantum theory was what is called the Schrödinger equation, which describes subatomic particles' behavior. Remember, quantum theory deals with the subatomic world. And the Schrödinger equation, developed by an Austrian physicist by the name of Erwin Schrödinger, describes the behavior of subatomic particles in terms of waves. Now, everybody might be saying, hey, wait a minute, you just said it's particles, not waves. Well, oddly enough,
it's both, right?
It's both. It's it's duality, particle wave duality. But you will notice, for those people who happen to see the book in my book, you will see that the Planck's constant is in Schrodinger's equation. So you might ask why he came up with this equation. Well, the reason is, keep in mind that in the early 20th century, in the prior century, the 19th century, physicists were used to dealing with waves. An awful lot of physics was done in wave theory, electromagnetism. James Clerk Maxwell, the great Scottish physicist. And so people were familiar with using wave equations, so they were very happy with the Schrodinger equation. But a similar equation was developed by Werner Heisenberg, a German physicist. He developed something called matrix mechanics, which was way more complicated than the Schrodinger equation. And most people who study quantum mechanics today use the Schrodinger equation. But Heisenberg's equation focused on the particle aspect. And
okay, that's who Walter White had that name after. I don't know if you ever heard of the Breaking Bad series. Yeah, Walter White was Heisenberg. It was after that guy.
Okay.
Yeah. Some people are probably laughing out there.
Yeah. For people who can see the slideshow, I have a teddy bear crying with over his mug of beer.
Yeah, crying in his beer.
And can we go back? And he's saying, "Please, no more formulas. Give me another drink." And from this point on, we're just going to deal with concepts, no more formulas, at least for the people that are watching the slideshow. And so I do have to do a little bit of physics here, but we'll go through this fairly quick. Our universe really consists of matter and force particles acting on the stage of space-time. And so now people might ask, hey, what the heck is space-time? Believe it or not, nobody knows. We know time is involved, but based on Einstein's theory of special relativity and general relativity. However, what is space-time? What's it made of? Made up of? Nobody knows. It could be made up of gravitons, the particle that's postulated to carry the gravity force. It could be a matrix or web of those. People simply don't know. But we do know that something called space-time, whatever space-time is made of, when it gets warped is what causes gravity. But it's also the stage upon which matter particles like electrons and force particles like photons that carry light, that they act and interact and with each other. A basic atom, sorry to have to go through this science here, but this is going to be helpful as we go further. A basic atom, the simplest atom possible, is a hydrogen atom, which would be a proton in the nucleus and an electron happily zooming around in orbit around it. But in the slide that I show here, I show an isotope of hydrogen, which is a proton and a neutron in the nucleus. And I just show that to point out that you can have both protons and neutrons in the nucleus, and other heavier elements have many more protons and neutrons and stuff. And this isotope of hydrogen is called deuterium. And I just want to mention it real quickly. A third isotope of hydrogen has two neutrons in the nucleus plus a proton, and that's called tritium, which will come in handy later on. Okay. And a proton, sorry to get into this detail, but it'll be helpful. And a proton itself is made up of smaller particles called quarks. And every proton has 3 quarks in it. They're called up and down quarks. Let's see. And then we can describe all matter particles as made up of quarks or leptons, or both. So quarks make up neutrons and protons, And 99% of all matter in the universe is made up of either up and down quarks and a basic electron and normal electron, most people are familiar with, or electron neutrinos, just those 4 particles. But there are 2 strange higher energy families called the second and third families of matter particles, which are called fermions, in honor of Enrico Fermi, an Italian physicist who did a lot of work classifying and studying matter, the basic matter particles of nature. And so that describes the matter particles. The force particles, and now we want to pay attention here. The matter particles are important, but the force particles are going to be a lot of what we'll be talking about from this point on. There are 4 fundamental forces in nature, and those looking at the slide can see them, but those who are listening, I will describe them. There's the strong nuclear force, which is carried by particles called gluons, notice glue, and the strong force is used to hold protons together in the nucleus, because remember, protons have positive charge, electrons have negative charge, and like repels, unlike attracts. So positive protons, whoops, I better watch the time. Positive protons don't want to party together, they want to separate. So it requires these gluons to hold them together. The weak nuclear force is represented by W plus, W minus, and Z neutral particles. Electromagnetism is carried by the photon messenger particle, and gravity is carried by a particle called postulated particles. We haven't seen it yet. Is called the graviton. And now you're going to wonder what physicists do. So what's their goal? What's their big goal in physics? That the holy grail of modern physics. And this is what's going to lead us to an explanation of UFO technology. The holy grail of modern physics is uniting the 4 forces of nature, the 4 fundamental forces: electromagnetism, weak nuclear force, strong nuclear force, and gravity. And
I just recently reconnected with my childhood friend, and we had a blast talking together. And I said to him, I said, weren't you into like UFOs when we were kids? Didn't you talk about that? And I asked him about his father got some magazine, and on the cover of the magazine was UFO.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah. Like, well, I have listened to your shows, so a couple of them. So, but he's really into this type of stuff. This isn't for everybody. Yeah. This is really interesting to me, but I understand this is hard to follow for some people.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell him to watch this show, and a little shout out to Ken. And yeah, okay. So
that's great.
Continue on.
And hi, Ken. And so it's believed way back at the beginning of the universe that all the forces were united, and the universe at that time was smaller than the head of a pin. And you can imagine the energy that was compressed in that tiny, tiny space. Considering today there are trillions of galaxies, and the universe is now 15 billion years old.
Do you think that theory is going to always hold up?
I do, and I'll show you why.
Okay, all right.
I'll show you why. That's a good question.
All right, but I'm just going to let you know in like 3 minutes we got to leave. Here. Well, I'm just going to do this. So they just going to close out the show in about 3 minutes for KGRA Radio. We're going to continue on, but I want to thank everyone over there for listening. And if you wanted to watch the rest of the show at some point, come over and watch the YouTube video over at podcastufo.com. Also, our guest next week is going to be Earl Grey. He's a real character. I know he's not a T. He's a real fun guy in the LA area, I believe it is, and a real nice guy. He'll be on next week for our show. So let's continue on.
Okay. So it's believed that at the beginning of the universe, there was what we now call the Big Bang. And at that time, the universe expanded from a tiny dot, infinitesimally small dot. It began the expansion that we and eventually reached the size of the universe we see today. But it's also believed that at this time, the 4 fundamental forces of nature separated out from being a combined, unified, single force. And this is going to be important. So the first forces that separated out right after the Big Bang were a force known as the GUT force, G-U-T, Grand Unified Theory, which is actually a combination of the strong nuclear force and something called the electroweak force. And then the other force that came out at the time of the Big Bang, there was only two forces, GUT and gravity. Gravity was the second. And then the GUT force broke out, as I mentioned, into the strong nuclear force and electroweak. And then the electroweak force broke out into electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force, which, by the way, is responsible for radioactivity. The strong nuclear force keeps the nucleus together. The weak nuclear force causes radioactivity. So that's the goal of modern physics, to unify these four fundamental forces of nature. And they have had some very good success in doing this. They've been able to, for example, unify the electric and magnetic forces or fields into what we call electromagnetism. At one time, it was thought the electric field and the magnetic field were two separate forces. But James Clerk Maxwell and Maxwell's laws showed that these are combined in a theory he calls the electromagnetic theory. And it turns out way back in the 1970s, in particle accelerators, they actually were able to combine, and by smashing subatomic particles together in these giant circular accelerators where they get particles up to the speed of light going in opposite directions. And when they crash together, you can imagine it's a pretty spectacular crash and at a very small point.
Let me ask you, has anything, since CERN came along, has anything changed in their theories on these things, or is everything just holding exactly the way they thought?
So far, things are holding together, all these theories. So they, of course, keep, as you pointed out, they keep upgrading these particle accelerators, and each new class of particle accelerators is still able to confirm earlier theories, plus they're able to add new knowledge, and which I can mention. When they were able to create the electroweak force, that gave tremendous impetus to the concept, the idea that the universe did start they know it's likely that the universe started at a higher energy, and this was proof, very strong proof, that the forces were once united in a single super force. So, and then another unification theory that they're currently working on is unifying this strong nuclear force and the electroweak force, the GUT, the Grand Unified Theory that I had mentioned before. And they are working on that, and they hope to see evidence of that by other ways. They probably won't see that at particle accelerators because the energy requirements are too high, but they may see some other type of evidence in detectors, deep underground detectors, where they're looking for evidence of the a breakdown of the GUT force. And so way back in the early universe, and so now people who have been watching the unification that we've been looking at so far of the electric, magnetic, the weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force will have noticed that the one force that's absent, that's missing from this unification attempts theory so far is gravity. Why is gravity not included in all these, decades-long attempts to unify the four forces of nature? And we'll look at that next. So here's how we're going to look at it. For those that can see the slide, I'm comparing the strength of the four fundamental forces, but those who can't, I'll describe them. If we set the gravity force at a at 1 for comparison, so I'm just using a unit of 1, then the weak nuclear force is 10 to the 25th power stronger than gravity. Yikes. That's the number.
Like glued together.
That's like the number 1 followed by 25 zeros.
Amazing.
And the electromagnetic force is 10 to the 36 power stronger, and strong is 10 to the 38th. And this is absolutely staggering. In fact, this gigantic separation in the strength of the 4 fundamental forces is such a big problem or puzzle in physics that it has its own name. It's called the hierarchy problem. And we're going to take a look at that.
But isn't that, am I overthinking this? Isn't that how things basically stay together? I mean, if they didn't have that force, everything would be splitting apart. I mean,
well, it would be
disintegrating.
Worse than that. And so the hierarchy problem is all you'll see here is also equivalent to the puzzle of the weak mass versus the Planck mass. Sorry for the technicality, but the weak mass is the mass at which all matter is roughly in the range of, and it's a relatively small mass. All matter particles don't have that particularly great mass. But the Planck mass in physics is believed to be the highest mass that is likely in the universe. And one of the big puzzles is it turns out that if all the matter particles were at the Planck mass rather than the weak mass, and the Planck mass is 16 orders of magnitude greater than the weak mass. So if all the particles in the universe were at this higher level, then we could unify the 4 fundamental forces of nature. But that comes with a real problem. And that problem is if all particles, all matter particles, protons, neutrons, electrons and stuff were all at the Planck scale, the universe would disintegrate. It would compress. It would just collapse instantly. And I asked an expert, Homer Simpson, his opinion, and he said, "Do you mean my favorite donut shop will disappear?" And I would like to say to our expert Homer, not only your favorite donut shop, but everything else too.
Here's a question. I can't pull them up in chat because
Okay.
the way we're doing the PowerPoint, I can only read them from here. And I don't know if this is accurate. This is just a question statement. Gravity is outside of space-time. It makes space-time wobble. What else is outside of space-time?
It's possible that gravity does exist in our space-time. In fact, it has to. It's one of the 4 fundamental forces. But we're going to get to a possibility that there might be some other strange things going on which may relate to that question.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're going to have to look at the evolution of modern physics to see if we can find a way to explain the UFO phenomenon. And quickly, currently physics, established physics, is something called the Standard Model, which is basically a synthesis of classical mechanics. That would be Isaac Newton and the classical physicists, and general relativity and quantum mechanics. And those comprise what we know as the Standard Model. And this model has been tested rigorously in particle accelerators and other experiments, and has been proven to a high degree of accuracy. But of course, physicists are also looking at other theories. And over the years, like I mentioned, they've been looking at the grand unified theory. And there's a number of other theories. I'll just mention them briefly. And these are going to be super important to helping explain the UFO phenomenon. So some of them are in the 70s and 80s, things called supersymmetry and 4-dimensional supergravity. Then along came 5-dimensional Kaluza-Klein theory and 11-dimensional supergravity. Don't worry, don't memorize this stuff. I'm just
There's
giving
no
you
quiz, right?
There's no quiz.
Okay.
And so it's believed if extra dimensions exist, particles will be created called KK particles or Kaluza-Klein particles that will be from the extra dimensions. And then between the 70s and right up to the 2020s, right up to about now, there were theories that were called string theory and superstring theory, 10-dimensional and 11-dimensional, and that eventually morphed into something called M theory, which, by the way, seems to be the final theory. And these brains and extra dimension membranes appear to be where physics is now headed. And
isn't the brains like a multiple type of, like a multiverse type of thought? The brains, or am I thinking of something else?
The multiverse is another concept, but the membranes, although it could be related, that could be. The membranes refer to any given universe, and we're in one universe. And within that universe, they believe that matter, at first they used to think it was made up of strictly infinitesimally point particles. Then in the 70s, they began to get evidence that subatomic particles might be made up of little tiny, tiny wiggling strings. That's the birth of string theory. And then as time went on, they began to realize that other strange things were out there too, called membranes. And these membranes could be 2D, two-dimensional, so like a flat sheet of paper, or they could be 3-dimensional, or they could be 4-dimensional, all the way up to 9 dimensions. And some of these membranes, like a flat membrane, could be wrapped around a portion of space-time that's very tiny. And if it's wrapped around tight enough, it would actually appear as a point particle. And so all this kind of crazy stuff is going on. And so to kind of sum it up, I'll go through this. So modern physics is pointing at very likely a 10 to 11 dimensional universe. The 10 and 11 is not really critical. Some parts of the theory, so they have basically 5 different theories that are part of what they call M theory. But it turns out they now believe that all 5 of these theories, they are each self-consistent, and physicists at the beginning, during the last 2 or 3 decades, have been very worried about this, because they had 5 self-consistent theories until they discovered something called duality, which appears to show that these theories are related to each other. And I won't get into too much detail on that, perturbation theory and things like that, but it's critical to the point. The critical thing here is that there appears to be a single super theory, M theory, which nobody has defined. It was actually, the name comes from Ed Witten at Princeton University, and he left it ambiguous deliberately, but some people call it membrane theory, some people call it mother of all theories. And somebody's got to make a movie out of this. And so it turns out that 6 of the 11 extra dimensions, so if there's 4 fundamental dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time, then 11 would make 7 extra. And it looks like 6 of those extra dimensions are curled up at every point in space-time and do not interest us here for our purposes. That leaves 5 large dimensions. And as I mentioned, historically, it was thought that we lived in a 4-dimensional universe, 3 of space and 1 of time. Special relativity and general relativity are based on that. But M theory, so one of the theories that's coming out of M theory, and mind you, there's a lot of theories coming out, but the one that I latched onto way back in the 1990s is a theory that suggests that there are 2 four-dimensional membranes, one of which is us, the universe that we live in. And you can think of them on either end. So of course, we're three-dimensional creatures, so I can only show this in a three-dimensional description. But imagine two flat pieces of paper opposite each other with a separation between them. And each of those flat pieces of paper are a membrane, a space-time membrane. One on one side is the world we live in, which is called the weak membrane, after the energy level that we live in, or that our universe is based on. And the other one is called the Planck membrane. And these two membranes are floating in a larger five-dimensional universe. So this isn't just the fifth dimension. It's in between these two membranes is a five-dimensional space. That's important, space-time. And so for those watching the slideshow, you'll see a picture of the two space-time membranes, four-dimensional membranes. And it's believed that all the fundamental particles in nature, both matter and force particles, are little wiggling strings that are open-ended. And now here is where, this is the key thing, and this we're very quickly approaching the explanation of the UFO phenomenon. It's believed that all the matter and force particles, like a photon, with which we need to see, photons hit the retina in the back of your eye, and that's how you see reflected off of objects. And but it's believed that the open ends of the wiggling strings are stuck on the four-dimensional membrane, the weak membrane where we live. And that when you go out at night, look up in the sky and see the stars and everything, that's all part of the four-dimensional membrane we live in. So every single particle that we talked about earlier are stuck. The two open ends are stuck on this membrane and cannot leave, except for one particle. The one particle that is believed that could leave the four-dimensional membrane is the graviton. And it's believed
because
to be
I'm reading it.
oh, yeah, it's okay. It's believed to be a closed loop. And that means it's not stuck in our membrane. And this is the key to the UFO phenomenon. So a theory called warp geometry is one of the ones I've been looking at that I believe is the one. And it solves the hierarchy problem. Remember, we were looking at the hierarchy problem and why gravity is so much so much weaker than the other fundamental forces of nature. So this theory, warp geometry, is derived from M theory. It was developed by physicists at Harvard and Johns Hopkins universities, but it's also based on other theories that came before that. And it explains why gravity is exponentially weaker than the other forces of nature. So it's believed that the two four-dimensional membranes in warp geometry are either ends of this five-dimensional bulk. Of course, one membrane we live on, the weak membrane. The second membrane is called the gravity brane and is parallel to the weak membrane. It is believed that the gravity brane is warped in such a way, and branes can have warping to them that affects space-time near them. It's believed that the gravity brane is warped in such a way that almost all gravitons in what is called the bulk, the five-dimensional bulk in between, causes virtually all gravitons to want to hug the gravity brane and not stay in the larger bulk. So gravitons in the four-dimensional weak membrane where we live, our universe, are free to move over to the five-dimensional bulk, but the vast majority of them, exponentially large amount, move over toward the gravity brane. And that explains the weakness of gravity on the four-dimensional weak brane that we live on, that is at about a TeV or trillion electron volt energy level. And there is something called the graviton probability function, which goes up steeply, sharply, as you get closer to the gravity brane between the two the two four-dimensional membranes that are sitting out there in the five-dimensional bulk. And now we're going to see the solution to the UFO question and the technology. So we know from general relativity that strong gravity shrinks distance. So this is just normal general relativity that is well understood. Where gravity is strong, distance between points shrinks. Okay, this is important. And I believe UFOs are penetrating into this five-dimensional bulk to go between the stars. In other words, Mother Nature, we don't have to warp space-time ourselves. If we can just figure out how to get into the five-dimensional bulk, then we can take advantage of the warped nature of that five-dimensional bulk. It's severely warped. So distance will shrink, and we use that as a pathway to the stars. It shortens distance. And in other words, we do not need to come up with the gargantuan energy needed to warp space-time. Mother Nature does it for us. That is the key. And
so you think other civilizations, intelligent civilizations, have figured out this puzzle?
Absolutely. And we'll get back to that. We'll get to that in 1 second.
Yep.
So, and so basically what I did a graphic here, which the people that are watching the show on YouTube can see, but it just basically shows the warping of space-time. And one of the things we will see in particle accelerators, if these extra dimensions exist, we will see undetected energy lost, which is KK particles going back into the five-dimensional bulk. And by the way, that comes important in a second. Okay, so I believe what UFOs are doing is they're coming through the bulk to our. Somehow they figured out they have their own GPS system to navigate the five-dimensional bulk. Remember, that's part of our larger universe, but not part of the four-dimensional universe we're in. Okay, although we're in a sense part of that bigger, and they have figured out how to. I believe what they're doing is they're surrounding their ship with KK gravitons, and these KK gravitons. If anybody has seen the movie Extraterrestrial, E.T., what is the number one thing E.T. wants to do?
Go home.
He wants to go home. Thank you, Martin. Right, that was perfect. He wants to go home. The same is true of these KK gravitons. So I believe these other civilizations are in our four-dimensional universe, maybe Alpha Centauri, the closest star system to us, for all we know. And they figured out how to surround their ship with these KK gravitons, pull it into the bulk, and then you take advantage of the shrunken distance in the bulk to travel to our sun, Sol, S-O-L, as it is known in Greek mythology. And they figured out how to reduce the number of KK gravitons around their ship and allow the ship to go back out into the four-dimensional universe, and then they pop out. They probably have long ago figured out a navigation system, their own five-dimensional GPS, and so I think that's what they're doing.
And Mark D'Antonio kind of works off of this. I've seen him at a presentation, where he thinks they have like lanes almost,
and
they're figured out in the bulk.
Mark saw one of my presentations many years ago, about 10 years ago, and he likes the same. He picked up the concept there, and he likes. He believes it's. He likes the concept, and another guy that also in the UFO field, like Mark, that also liked the concept was Stanton Friedman.
Oh,
do you remember Stanton?
Of course, yeah.
Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he was a nuclear physicist. And when I did a talk up at Exeter, New Hampshire, he came up to me afterward and said, "Bob," he said, I think you might be onto something, So, but anyway, So I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to go back to one of the stories we looked at way back at the beginning. Sir Francis Chichester, the world famous pilot, back in 1931. Now, mind you, this is way before people were talking about UFOs, but he described a UFO. Well, at that time, he called it a craft. He didn't know, a ship. I think the word he used was ship.
This was the one in 31?
1931.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, and it's in his book, The Lonely Sea and Sky, on page 165, if anybody wants to look. And here's an exact quote from Sir Francis Chichester. He was knighted later for his accomplishments. The object came on, but instead of increasing in size, it diminished as it approached. And I emphasize that in the slide for the people listening to the audio. When it was quite near, it suddenly became its own ghost. 1 second, I could see right through it, and the next, it had entirely vanished. And in another chapter, he says he could see the waves and the ocean below it. Now, I want everybody to pay attention to what he said. It diminished, meaning it shrunk, as it approached him, which doesn't make sense, unless if it was pushing into the bulk, and he was seeing the ghost image of it as it was passing into the bulk, it might very well appear to shrink in the bulk, because the distances shrink.
But how would he? It would. I would think that it would look like it was going away if it was getting smaller. How did he know? But he knew it was coming toward him.
Yep, he knew it was coming toward him because it was right next to a cloud, and this thing was right on the edge of this cloud. And as he approached the cloud, he would have, if it was if it was something that was happening everywhere, the cloud would have shrunk too, but it didn't.
Yeah.
Only the object shrank.
I see.
But that's a good question. And so now I'm going to give an example of how warp geometry works. UFOs traveling in the bulk. So as I mentioned, warp geometry affects distance, and distance shrinks in the warped 5-dimensional bulk. Then it turns out that the nearest star system to Earth is Alpha Centauri. It's at 4.3 light years, or about 25 trillion miles. And now the gravity force in the bulk increases by 16 orders of magnitude as you approach the Planck brane, that is the gravity brane on the other end of the 5-dimensional bulk. That's 10 to the 16 power stronger gravity over there than we experience. Believe me, that's the number 1 followed by 16 zeros. And that's strong. And so distance really shrinks in there. And by the way, I believe the UFOs protect themselves by surrounding themselves with vast amounts of micro black holes, which are created by gravitons. So if we assume that the UFO only goes partway into the bulk, they're too lazy to go further. And so where gravity is only 10 to the 12 orders of magnitude stronger than what it is on the TEV membrane, then the distance to Alpha Centauri shrinks from 25 trillion miles to a mere 25 miles. And Martin and I could jump in our car and drive to Alpha Centauri in half an hour, and hopefully not get caught by the 5-dimensional bulk police.
So, well, I really don't have anything going on. So, but listen though, the one thing I've always wondered on how people conventionally think of something, going at, what do you call it, warp speed or whatever, is first of all, is how do they avoid particles, and things that may, at such a high speed, and then how do they stop?
Very good question.
Those two things.
And that's a great question. Is that a question that came in?
No, something I thought of.
Okay. So what Martin asked, how how do they protect themselves as they move through the 5-dimensional bulk from particles that are in there? Wait, what was the other part of it?
And how they stop.
And how do they stop? Okay, they protect themselves by surrounding the craft, I believe, with micro black holes, which are created by KK gravitons. And this is something we expect to do in particle accelerators if these extra dimensions exist. It may take a bigger particle accelerator than the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland, but hopefully we'll be able to do it. And other civilizations look like they've already been doing it for many, many years. I mean, millennia, maybe millions of years. And so these micro black holes, if you remember way back at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that micro black holes will absorb, or at least cause to orbit around them, any particle going at the speed of light or near the speed of light, or even slower than the speed of light, considerably slower, so that any particle that so there'll be each UFO is surrounded by a shroud of micro black holes, and so as they're moving through the bulk, or for that matter through our atmosphere, any particles that hit them are just absorbed or temporarily go into orbit around these micro black holes. That's what happens to them, and they don't affect the UFO at all. The guys can be inside drinking a cup of coffee, watching Back to the Future, and they'll be perfectly fine, And so that's how they do it. Now, as far as accelerating and decelerating in the bulk, I believe they are subject to Newton's laws of action and reaction, just like we are. And I think they're able. And see, now one of the things I think they do is because they surround themselves with micro black holes, they're absorbing all these gravitons around them. So the bulk, or for that matter, the 4-dimensional membrane that we live on, called the weak membrane, our universe, we do not, the gravity that occurs there, whether in the bulk or on the weak membrane, does not see this object as being massive, that is, having a lot of mass. In fact, they probably maintain a tiny mass, but the mass is so insignificant that all they have to do is shoot out a couple of gamma rays out the back, action, reaction, and they can move through the bulk. And their GPS system, assuming that they figured out how to navigate in the bulk, probably millions of years ago, or at least advanced civilizations, they know that they know when they're going to be approaching their own planet. So at that point, they reverse the thrust and go out the other way. But they don't need a whole lot of thrust because neither the bulk nor the weak brain sees an object that has a lot of mass, because the micro black holes absorb so many gravitons. Oh, and of course, gravitons are needed to communicate the gravitational force to measure mass. Gravitons, when you get up in the morning and stumble out of bed, the gravitons are going back and forth between yourself and the Earth, and that's how the Mother Earth is measuring your weight, and that's why you're stumbling. So, and I'm a runner, by the way. I've run the Boston Marathon 3 times, and I stumble too. And not until your first cup of coffee, the first anti-gravity technology, a cup of coffee, are you finally able to withstand gravity and move on with the day's business. And so, but the UFO though, when I jumped out of bed, if I was surrounded by these micro black holes like the UFO is, the Earth would only measure my mass as being an ounce, and I'd be hopping around having a grand old time. I wouldn't even need a cup of coffee.
How can the miniature black holes, whatever you call them, micro black holes, how can they be maintained?
That's a good question. Yeah. We're going to get to that. You may be jumping ahead a little bit, but I'll show you that.
Oh, okay. I want to put here's another thing in the chat.
Okay.
And I'm going to repeat this because a lot of people seem to claim this, and that is there are UFO crafts that are bigger on the inside than they are on the outside. A lot of people have.
Oh, that idea. That's kind of like what's that guy? The guy that travels around in the phone booth.
People like Travis Walton have mentioned it.
Yes,
And then
and
there's been a number of people that claim, they've been abducted on board something.
It's an interesting idea. The idea that the inside of the UFO has different measurements than the outside. In a sense, that maybe perhaps is possible in the sense that the micro black holes on the outside, of course, create a tremendous gravity force, and they are then shaping space-time around the UFO. There may be an inner part of the UFO that is permanent, but the outer part, not the UFO itself, but what appears to be the UFO, whose shape could potentially change as the gravitons, the level of KK gravitons that are created is moderated or changed, and it might actually affect what appears to be the shape of the UFO. But on the inside, the guys are perfectly happy and enjoying their coffee, what was the other thing? Oh, I want to get to the other question you had. How do they maintain the KK gravitons, or increase or decrease? And,
how do they maintain their black hole type thing?
And so that's just a cartoon for the people watching the YouTube video. I have a cartoon of Bart Simpson, of Homer Simpson, grumbling about Bart saying he goes to Alpha Centauri in just 30 minutes. And Homer says, yeah, sure. But in the background in the window, you see Bart being sucked up by a UFO.
Yeah. So the guy that one of the illustrators on The Simpsons is really into UFOs, right?
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah. He's drawn all kinds of paintings. He did Lee Spiegel's concept of his UFO encounter and stuff. He's a great guy. He goes to a lot of conferences.
Oh, no kidding. Gee, we ought to get in touch with him.
Yeah.
And now going back, excuse me, I just want to jump back to the two big questions on UFO technology. The first question was, how do they get here? And the answer is they're taking advantage of the natural warped pathway provided by Mother Nature. And so we don't need the energy to warp space-time. Mother Nature has done it for us. And I find that kind of amazing. It's almost as if the universe was created for intelligent life, and then when it evolved to a certain point, it would be able to go visit each other and say, hey, guys, what are you guys up to? But anyway, that does answer the first question, this natural warped pathway in the 5-dimensional bulk. The second question is, how are these craft able to perform inertia-defying acrobatics in Earth's atmosphere? This is real quick. We can answer this very quick. So KK gravitons are created by the micro black holes, as I talked about, and in the four-dimensional micro black holes will decay after they are created into fermions, scalar bosons, and gauge bosons. And don't worry about the technical word. But we will see something, and a lot of people will be familiar with this term, something called Hawking radiation, named after Stephen Hawking, the famous English physicist. Mm-hmm. And this, by the way, is important. And Mark D'Antonio, if you're listening, this is something, maybe we can collaborate on, and because I believe we may be able, if we can detect Hawking radiation from these UFOs. I know Doug Trumbull was a guy that Mark used to work with. Unfortunately, Doug Trumbull passed away. Yep. And he was working on building a platform, a mobile platform based on a Humvee, which had equipment to detect various radiation emissions coming out of these UFOs. And should I be lucky enough to win the Mega Millions or the Powerball, Mark, I'm getting in touch with you so we can get in touch with whoever's still remaining involved with
Yeah.
Mark Trumbull's project.
Yeah, we know that Humvee is somewhere.
Somewhere.
I saw pictures of it. Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's there's a video which we can't show for copyright, I think, but it's under UFO TOG, UFO TOG photography, and look, UFO TOG Doug Trumbull. There's a fantastic 5-minute video that I urge everybody to take a look at. You can look at it individually, but for copyright reasons, we can't show it on the YouTube here. So going back to the micro black holes. So these 4D gravitons are absorbed by the micro black holes that are and that means that the graviton exchange between planet Earth and the UFO is reduced. I don't think entirely. I think it leaves a tiny amount of mass to be detected by the planet Earth, and they need that for an action-reaction engine. And by the way, I believe these UFOs are still subject to Newton's laws of action-reaction going back, 300 years, 400 years. And but the key thing to remember in this is that instead of, so this is not anti-gravity. So that's not what this is. Instead, the apparent mass of the UFO, as far as the Earth is concerned, is reduced severely, tremendously. And which means, since Einstein said the gravitational mass and the inertial mass are equivalent, that's the foundation of general relativity. Since they are equivalent, that means the inertial mass of the UFO is reduced as well. And that's how these UFOs are able to overcome inertial forces. Oh, I got to put on my glasses. We got it. If I can interrupt, we have a message coming in. Oh, got it. We're good. We're very close. So I'm just showing a picture. It shows KK gravitons and micro black holes around a UFO, and a more detailed picture. And so another slide showing the equivalence of inertial mass and gravitational mass. And so now we're going to get to what UFOs are. And the Large Hadron Collider, which is a massive particle accelerator located in Geneva, Switzerland. I think it's 13 miles in diameter or something like that. And this thing is gigantic, and also called the LHC, Large Hadron Collider. Hadron means heavy, Greek word. It means heavy particles. They smash them together. And it's expected to produce, or they hope to produce, KK gravitons and micro black holes to be produced in turn from the KK gravitons.
I thought they produced the micro black holes for a fraction of a second.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I thought
they might have,
but I might have that totally wrong.
I'm
sure I'm going to be corrected because there's a lot of people out there that will know about that. Yeah.
I hope so. And UFO, because if so, we're on the threshold. UFO configurations, the shapes of UFOs are typically discs, cylinders, or spheres. Even triangle UFOs have bright circles in each corner. So many of you have already figured out what this is coming to. So why do UFOs have this circular aspect to their shapes? Because UFOs are particle accelerators. That's what they are. And to Martin's earlier question, how do they maintain the level of KK gravitons and the micro black holes? They keep these particle accelerators going all the time. And so whenever the thing is operating, it's cranking out KK gravitons and micro black holes. And a shout out to Mark again. Mark, if either you can win the Mega Millions or Powerball, or if I can win it, or Martin can win it, and is willing to fund us, if we could fund a fleet of these mobile detection centers that Doug Trumbull came up with, it designed and built, and I want to add some additional equipment to those, equipment that will detect Hawking radiation. He didn't include that in his in the various equipment that he included in detection equipment. But Hawking radiation, if we can detect that, that would virtually confirm that these UFOs are producing micro black holes from KK gravitons, and that's how they're operating.
They have not. Just to correct myself, they have not produced. They think it may be possible, but some people are thinking it's never possible. So it's controversial.
Yep. Well, the next slide I have here for the audio people and for those who are actually looking at it is a cartoon of Professor Landsberg was fast regretting becoming the first man to successfully create a mini black hole in the laboratory. And it shows him being sucked into the black hole.
I think a lot of people are really scared about that too, like them creating one.
No, it's not a problem.
I know, but people are. They think it could destroy the whole Earth. You know, there are people that.
No, it's not a problem. In fact, what happens is micro black holes. Physicists know for sure that almost as soon as they are formed, very quickly within seconds, they decay into Hawking radiation. And I'm going to get to that in a second too. So we don't have to worry about that. All we want to, so
this is just a real quick question from one of the listeners.
Love to hear it.
Dr. Richard wants to know, have you ever discussed your ideas with other physicists? And if so, what do they think?
Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist, and he loved it. He thinks that there's something to it. Unfortunately, Stanton passed away a few years ago.
Anyone else besides Stanton?
I have talked to some other scientists and or people in the science community, and they too say, this sounds plausible, and it really depends upon whether they discover these extra dimensions. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this a little bit further back. The reason why I believe these extra dimensions exist, and that we just haven't detected them yet, but we will, is because of all those stories about UFOs becoming partially transparent and disappearing, or as well as Captain Schultz in 1981 observing what a UFO that seemed to be splitting out of the blue sky and breaking out into our four-dimensional universe. And I believe that is an example of one coming in, and the others are examples of UFOs leaving our four-dimensional space-time. And
here's another quick question here. If their ship was covered in micro black holes, wouldn't they be invisible to the naked eye?
No, micro black holes are invisible.
Oh, okay.
And, so now but that does deserve a bit more to it. Here's what I want to point out. Inside the bulk, the number of micro black holes they create will be tremendous, and they're that whoever wrote that question. If you were able to see in the five-dimensional bulk, which I think you can, then you would probably not be able to see the UFO because there would be so many micro black holes that they would absorb photons. However, and this is key, I thought about this, and that's an extraordinarily good question. In our four-dimensional space-time that we live in, the weak membrane, the number of gravitons is so few that we don't, and there's way more photons than there are gravitons, that we only need a small number of gravitons to absorb the tiny number of gravitons that are emitted, exchanged between the UFO and planet Earth. Isn't that fascinating? We don't need a whole lot of micro black holes because remember, gravity is incredibly weak compared to the electromagnetic force, which is related to photons. So therefore, or to put it a little differently, the photons, there may be 10 to the 30th, 1 followed by 30 zeros, more photons than there are gravitons. So we only need a handful of gravitons to make this craft, to eliminate its inertial mass, or to reduce its inertial mass. And so it would still be perfectly visible. But I will grant one thing Do you know the name of the questionnaire? And
TJ T Hammer.
T Hammer. T Hammer.
Yeah.
Your question is very interesting in another respect. If you remember early on in the talk, we talked about the UFOs that were passing overhead, that observers noted that parts of it appeared solid and parts of it appeared wavy. So that may indeed be those parts where the gravitons are a bit stronger, and so they're distorting light in those areas. And so that's a terrific question.
Good.
Good. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh, so we have a few minutes left.
Oh yeah, and I'm also going to play that video when we're done too.
Oh, excellent. There's some circumstantial evidence that is very important. Just two pieces that are very, very interesting. Number one is a UFO observed over Sonora, California in 1976. And the second piece of circumstantial evidence is a crisis in physics. And we're going to get into those. We'll first look at the UFO in Sonora, California. So the UFO sighting in Sonora, California.
Oh, the angel's hair.
Yeah.
I remember that.
You remember?
Yeah.
See, it's wonderful being with Martin because he goes way back
This
in the
was in
UFO
the trees
field.
and
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If everybody heard what Martin said, it was dangling in the trees, and a woman came out and had the presence of mind she had a clean, empty jar of mayonnaise that was formerly with mayonnaise, and she gathered up, put it in the jar, sealed it, and then gave it to some scientists. But what was found in the angel hair was tritium, which is amazing from the UFO. Tritium is rare in nature, but guess where it's found? It's found in particle accelerators.
Really?
Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
There's kind of secondhand circumstantial evidence that these things are giant particle accelerators.
How about that? I never heard that part of it. Wow.
See, isn't that amazing? And when I first saw that, I said, holy
tritium, how
moly.
is tritium, produced in the accelerator?
It just happens to be a byproduct of the various reactions that are taking place, the interactions. And now the second thing is the crisis in physics, and there's a theory called supersymmetry, which was supposed to solve the hierarchy problem. The hierarchy problem, if everybody remembers, is the weakness of gravity and compared to the other three fundamental forces in nature: the strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism. So it was believed that supersymmetry would solve the hierarchy problem. But supersymmetry, as particle accelerators became more and more powerful, it was expected that we would begin seeing particles predicted by supersymmetry. But they have never been seen. And that put the entire supersymmetry physics community into it. Let me put it this way, a dither. They were really upset about this because the particles they predicted should be there, but they weren't. Which means the failure of supersymmetry, which solved the hierarchy problem, means that concepts like warp geometry are now way more likely. And that's exactly what I believe is going to happen. So the question is, where do we go from here? And I'll just briefly describe. And can we prove? Yes, the Large Hadron Collider will give evidence confirming or disproving M theory and warp geometry. It's going to take, they're going to be upgrading that in a few years. And I think it's going to take a more powerful accelerator to really get at this. The second thing is more UFO data needs to be acquired. In particular, a full spectrum analysis of brightly lit UFOs whose emissions show it working at maximum power would provide critical data on how these things function. And Mark D'Antonio, if you're listening out there, this is where if we could somehow hook up with the people involved with Doug Trumbull's project, that would be fantastic, And then so what we're looking for finally is Hawking radiation, micro black holes. Oh, and one more interesting piece of evidence. a guy, an early UFO researcher who many people may remember, especially people in the audience who are older, not X and Z generation. Martin and I are a little bit older than that. What are we, A generation?
Yeah.
And so Alpha. And but anyway, way back in the 50s, Paul Hill, who was a NASA engineer, used Geiger counters to try to gather data from a close encounter UFO sightings. He had a whole team of people running around. And back in the 50s, the UFOs were particularly interested in the east coast of the US in the early 50s. Martin had mentioned that earlier in the talk, 1952. And Paul Hill, the engineer, was very lucky that one of his crews picked up some emissions from a UFO that was only like 100 yards away, and it was coming up and down below a low hill. And anyway, what they picked up was an intense gamma rays. And gamma rays, black holes, micro black holes, according to Hawking radiation, are believed when they decay to terminate in a burst of gamma rays. And that's exactly what they picked up. Now, keep in mind, the UFOs continually creating these micro black holes, which means they would be continually emitting gamma rays. Oh, and I might mention one other thing for safety reasons. If you happen to have a close encounter with a UFO, try to stay at least 100 feet away, because those gamma rays are very, very dangerous, and they can mutate the cells in your body and cause cancer.
Well, there's that Canadian.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the lake where the guy had the radiation burns, like a grill.
Oh, what the heck? Does anybody remember his name?
Yeah. I mean, I can figure it out in a minute.
Kochalek, something like that.
But I'll look it up while we're sitting here talking.
Okay.
So we're going to go another, I don't know, probably 10 minutes from now.
Probably not even that.
Okay.
Oh, just a few more things and I'm done. Detection of Hawking radiation, and that would be the full gamut of Hawking radiation, and that has like a normal curve, and would virtually confirm UFOs are using M theory, warp geometry, and KK gravitons and micro black holes in their technology. Falcon Lake.
Yep.
Yes.
And I'll try to get the.
Oh yes.
Oh, Stefan
Michalak.
Yep.
And
that's him. Yep.
So we cannot. Oh, just one before we go into that, we cannot predict the appearance of UFOs, but they are often seen multiple times in the same geographic area, such as the Phoenix Lights, Hudson Valley sightings, or the Belgian Triangles. So in a situation like that, if we could, and Mark, this is where we need your help, your connections. If we could get a fleet of these mobile emissions detectors for UFO detection equipment, like a dozen or more of these things, and bring them to the sites or the areas where there's a lot of sightings, would stand a pretty good chance of picking up the data we need.
There was a few other people also working with the equipment like this.
Yes.
Yeah, Chris O'Brien was, and even Paul, not Paul. I'm trying to Peter at the just last name begins with a D. I just can't think of it right now. Who is a UFO?
Yeah,
he takes UFO reports on one of the places. Davenport, Peter Davenport.
Davenport, I know him.
But I think Peter is looking for something more like radar or something.
Newfork.
Yeah, that's right.
National UFO Reporting Center.
Yeah.
And boy, that's pretty good between us.
Yeah, I know.
Even though we're the alpha generation. It takes two of us to remember anything.
Yeah. Are we done with this? Or we got another page or two?
That's it.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
But can you tell people about the Michalak?
That case, was back. Trying to think of that was 1967. He was basically someone that was a prospector.
Yeah,
he was out, and this thing came down. And there's a lot of great information for you. I could put that in the show notes the Falcon Lake incident in 1967. But he was in the hospital. His clothes were tested. He had like a grill radiation burn on his chest. And yeah, it was pretty serious.
Yep. And he had some signs of radiation poisoning in him.
Absolutely.
So
now this video you wanted me to play, Chichester 1931.
Absolutely.
This is who we were talking about.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna watch that right now.
It was a perfect shape. It was shaped sort of like a
amazing.
Yeah. And I wanted everybody to see these actual pilots talking about their observation, so to connect it to our to the show and our talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, sir.
And thank you, Martin, for having me.
It's so great
on the
we
show.
could meet right here on the Cape, and this has been a real pleasure. And so we'll be back next week with Earl Grey. And go ahead.
Could I?
Yes.
Could I do a shout out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Real quick, a shout out to my wife and daughter. My wife Carol and my daughter Debbie in Virginia. My wife's right here on the Cape, and a few others.
That's fine.
To my friend Joe Martinoli, to my brothers and sisters.
Is everyone watching?
They should. They're supposed to.
They better be.
They better be. And the Wild Harbor Country Store. They said they might be looking at it tonight too. So anyway, who else? There were some other people. If I left anybody out, sorry, but I couldn't remember off the tip of my tongue here.
All right, and hi Ken, my friend Ken, and yes, and while you're at it, I should do it too. Just I want to thank all the people that help out with the show that I don't thank enough. Palmer is excellent. He's always sending me information on UFOs every day. So is Phil. Phil's been great since a long time. Peggy out in Las Vegas, my great producer that helps out a lot. Donna is actually watching. So hello, Donna. Also my son, Evan, he makes all the graphics for the show. There's a lot of people behind the scenes that, you just see the finished product, however it is, good or bad. But there's a lot of people behind the scenes that really helps out a lot. Brock is helping out with the Facebook page. Currently, there's about 22,000 people on that. So you're welcome to join Facebook, our Facebook page. And also, I never say this enough, but we have a mailing list where we send out once a week newsletters, and that includes the blog and information on the guests and all that. And you just go to podcastufo.com. On the sidebar, you just put in your email address, click it, and you'll get an email to confirm. And that's all there is to that. And you can always unsubscribe to that as well. Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks again, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah. And remember, Earl Grey, not the T, the researcher, will be here next week. Thanks, everyone. Keep your eye on.